Roundtable discussion and thus advancing energy infrastructure expansion, creating investment pathways for a sustainable energy ecosystem. With us is George Lagios, Country Manager Greece for National Energy Holdings, Rita Galli, CEO of Hellenic Gas Transmission System Operator, Panagiotis Ladakakos, President, Hellenic Wind Energy Association Managing Director, Enteka Group, and the moderator, Mr. Yannis Vougiouklakis, Managing Director, Strategy, PwC. So, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, please proceed. Thank you.
Good evening, and thanks for the introduction. I think the intervention by Mr. Payot was right to the point. He already spoke for many issues relevant to energy in Greece, also in terms of creating or establishing Greece as an energy hub, but also flagging and highlighting some key infrastructure projects that are either in the pipeline or in the planning phase. Today I have the pleasure with me to have in our company 3 distinguished participants and representatives of the energy community, I would have to say. So I hope that you will go ahead with, let's say, a very interesting discussion and to have here as a podium, let's say, to bring into your attention some key challenges and opportunities. I think the issue about the energy infrastructure now has become, let's say, in the core of all the energy discussion, even under the recently presented NECP, let's say, the energy infrastructure projects highlight, let's say, a key role in the future expansion of the system. And I would say this role is dual. One is to serve domestic needs, domestic investments, and the other is to have this extroversy and to see how we could let's say, attain all these market opportunities that exist in our neighborhood in order to ensure also market competitiveness and to create new investments. So, not to waste more time, I would start first with Mrs. Galli. I think, Mrs. Galli, we are placed now in a very challenging era. The issue of energy transition, it is, let's say, in the agenda. But in the meantime, we have a lot of domestic challenges in terms of energy infrastructure and also in the gas, let's say, aspect. These challenges and these opportunities, how you perceive we should go ahead in the short term and maybe in the medium term in order to attain, let's say, all these targets and all these opportunities?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to participate to the event today. Well, you pointed out to the challenges of operating in a sector that might be potentially more affected than others by the transition, and of course the need to think how our infrastructure can be designed in order to be able to cope and, let's say, keep serving the energy needs in the future. Let me first look a little bit at the present, because I think that sometimes we don't have a full and clear picture about what the gas infrastructure are doing today for the energy system in Greece. In the sense that, of course, we associate gas pipelines or the LNG terminal to delivering gas to the consumers, which is true, of course, and the security of supply and diversification of the entry point remain one of the key mission of the natural gas system operator. But more and more what the system is providing or very intensively today is a role in balancing the overall energy system. And this is something that does not appear because there is a sufficient capacity still to cope with these fluctuations in the energy needs for electricity. And therefore, we haven't yet seen, let's say, the issue emerging and getting also some proper prices signal. And I'm referring to some key elements. First of all, let's say we have very significant intraday, day-by-day volatility. So we have a system which needs to be able to cope with the demand for gas for the power sector that can be, let's say, 40, 50% different on one day from the other. Recently, we had the days in which the electricity produced with the natural gas exceeded 100 gigawatt, and then we have had days a few months ago in which it could be 20 gigawatt. And this can switch on a day from day to day. So this is already an element of flexibility which is provided by the natural gas pipelines that can offer this storage role. On top of that, we have a second level of flexibility which is hidden, that is the intraday flexibility. We already provide a lot of intraday flexibility. This has been very intense during the summer. During the summer, we had many, many hours in which the pipes were filled with natural gas, which we kept importing at a constant rate. But the utilization was concentrated over the night hours after the sun dropped. And therefore, let's say, without this ability of the system to pack and contain this natural gas, we would have had, let's say, difficulties in complementing the demand, the production of electricity overnight. So and there is a third element, which is a little bit more the mid-term, that is the role of the LNG tanks storage, which, let's say, unfortunately, as a country, we don't have underground gas storages. And sometimes we see these, we start having a decoupling, for instance, between gas prices now in Greece and TTF, and this is mainly driven by the lack of storage, because other countries have more storage. But at least we have LNG storage. And the value of this storage has been strongly confirmed by the market appetite in the recent auction for capacity that we saw for the terminal, where we have had bookings now already up to until 2031, notwithstanding the fact that there is also a second LNG import terminal. And notwithstanding the NSCP projection, we have sold all the slots in the Revitusa terminal. So this is a clear signal about how the power producers, which are the main customers of our terminal, understand the need of storing LNG in order to capture the needs of the market. So I think that when we look at the mid-long-term role of natural gas infrastructure, we cannot look only at the absolute demand and supply balance, which still is quite robust and growing, but we also have really to understand all of the additional flexibility services which are provided and that are getting used more and more the more renewables we are incorporating into the system. So I believe that this is going to be a characteristic which will be exploited constantly and even more in the next couple of decades, and this will continue to give a significant role to natural gas infrastructures.
So you think that also the appropriate market signals should exist in order to, let's say, to reveal this importance, let's say, of some infrastructure and some, let's say, assets that have to be in place, and also to mobilize their continuation, let's say.
Yeah, well, the market signal, I think, will come the day we don't have enough capacity. And we've been very close in some days to make curtailments when, let's say, the intraday fluctuations were too big.
Okay, thank you. I think with the ending words of Mrs. Galli about curtailments, I think we could also raise the aspects that we have seen, let's say, in the electricity production here in Greece, and also especially for renewables, new renewables for power generation. I think in the last couple of years, I would say, definitely after 2020, the possibility to obtain green connection terms has become, let's say, maybe the most challenging, let's say, phase in the whole licensing process. I would like the opinion of Mr. Lagios and Mr. Ladakakos on this issue, where they both see, let's say, the bottlenecks maybe in this process, but also what could be the opportunities and the countermeasures to address these challenges. Maybe I would start with Mr. Ladakakos from the end.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to the American Hellenic Chamber for the invitation, and congratulations for this panel. The issue of grid connection is maybe the hottest discussion in the renewables market this period. I call it the battle for the electrical space. Okay. It seems that in this battle, the last years, due to the overheated interest of the investment community to invest in renewables, the government decided to change the old concept, first come, first served. This was a correct decision, but sometimes correct decisions need to be applied correct also in the details. The details have proven to, there is some space for improvement. This is why we have seen several revisions of these decisions. Anyhow, seeing today what is the status is that although I'm starting to lose the numbers, the evolution of the numbers is so fast, so I cannot say that I have the latest update of the figures. I see that
if you don't have Panagiotis, nobody has. You have.
I really don't. I'm sure that the system operator at MIA has the latest update of the figures. But it seems that if you add everything on the basket, operational projects, projects under construction, binding grid connection offers, projects that are somehow under the radar, like some small photovoltaics that are for residential uses, etc. And the big hydros, we are approaching, and the offshore wind, where there is a saved capacity of 1.9 gigawatt for the future projects. It seems that we have exceeded the figure of 30 gigawatt, and we are approaching the figure of 35 gigawatt. This is a huge figure. The question is, are all those projects going to be realized? Of course not. Is it wise to make an overbooking in the space versus the targets of 2030 or 2040? Yes, it is correct. But I think it is time to settle down a little bit and to see the evolution of the energy mix and to see maybe clever solutions in order to accommodate all these various sources together. And when I say clever solution, one discussion that has started in Europe, and I see that it will start also in Greece, is the discussion about the flexible grid connection agreements. It's a long discussion. We cannot do it now. There are many handicaps there, but it's something interesting that will help. Another discussion which is very important is what we see the last period as a general acceptance that wind energy has been a little bit left behind versus photovoltaic in this race. So we need to give some additional motives to wind farms in order to balance the renewable energy mix. And this is something that I'm saying not because I come from the wind energy community, but this is something that will work for the benefit of all the renewable communities. Because you mentioned the word curtailments. Curtailments is something that, hurts everybody, and we need to see how we will do it. So a balanced energy mix will help the producers in terms of curtailments, will help also the consumers in terms of balancing also the low energy prices in our energy mix. Because it doesn't make any sense to have zero prices in hours like 10, 11, or 12 o'clock at noon, and then during night times, for example, to see the prices skyrocketing above 600 or 700 euros as we experienced the last period. So in a nutshell, it's a very interesting discussion. I'm sure it will keep on going. I'm sure it's a small nightmare for all the stakeholders around the industry. But sooner or later, I think we will find the correct solutions.
Thanks very much. And I keep a keyword, market maturity, I think. That this we have to have in our mind. The era of invest and forget, I think, has passed completely. So here we have to be both realistic and market extrovert. So, Mr. Lagios, I think with the intervention of Mr. Ladakakos, we have seen, of course, you can add some of the challenges and the opportunities, but now we have also an evolving framework of how to deal with curtailments, redispatching issues, and things like that. You, from the side of investment, let's say, how you see this environment and what are the challenges there and what you want, let's say, to be in place, to be on the ground in terms of framework, in terms of mechanism, in terms of new services that could facilitate and could have this investment security and transparency, let's say, for the next era?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. So yes, as you rightfully mentioned, curtailment is becoming more and more a challenging issue for existing projects as well as, let alone for new business plans that investors are at the moment pulling together. What we would anticipate in terms of the market and in terms of the legislative framework coming into force would be for transparency in terms of geographical locations and also at national level when those curtailments are applied in collaboration with the IPTO and the Ministry of Energy. We would expect a compensation mechanism at some point to be, I think, introduced. We know that there are projects which have executed operational aid agreements with the APEP that normally should have been exempted from the said curtailments. However, what we experience at the moment is horizontal applications, let's say, compromising the export capacity of projects. So we understand that we are in a transitional phase, and with more work, I suppose we would arrive to a more stable, let's say, situation in the market. However, there's certainly a requirement for additional, for battery storage to become eventually, let's say, to eventually be installed in the network. We saw the auctions taking place like 2 years ago, and we still haven't realized any storage capacity in the grid, which is fundamental, I think. It would alleviate to a large extent impact from the said curtailment and would allow more further penetration of renewable capacity in the system. I think the newly voted legislation of the 5151 of 2024, which came into force recently in November, plays a pivotal role in furthering the introduction of storage, allowing bilateral call-pro PPAs this time, and promoting the issuance of reconnection terms for standalone projects outside of the auction regimes. So yeah, all these things contribute and should be factored in when creating new business plans. Investors today would have to allow more contingency, I think, in their business plans, should internalize and develop more financial engineering capabilities. I mean, business plans are becoming more and more sophisticated. Investors with operational capacity on the ground are in a more favorable position to cross-collateralize against the high-performing existing assets and support new assets by offering some, say, backup towards the banks, advancing the gearing. But certainly remains a challenging issue for everyone. I suppose diversification of the technology would help in terms of investing in PVs, wind, and also spreading across different geographical locations would also accommodate to an extent the impact from curtailments. But yes, we all remain it remains to be seen, and we remain, let's say, alerted in a way to react and invest in the most sensible manner.
Thank you. I also keep the words of diversification of technologies, diversification of fuels. I think we have all understand that the solution is not unique, and we have to have all the favorites and all the possible, let's say, solutions on the table, and decide and see how the market evolves and be ready, let's say, to react. I also keep the issue about storage and how storage can play a role as a new, I would say, even market and both infrastructure asset in the development of the new era. And I think also in the gas network, I think Mrs. Galli also, the readiness of the infrastructure in order to receive new type of fuels like biomethane, hydrogen, and also to allow the development is a new challenge, maybe not the same for biomethane and hydrogen, but with different, of course, market possibilities. However, it's still we don't have a clear framework and definitely we have a lot of challenges to face and ahead of us. How do you attain, let's say, all this environment for new gases, let's say, in your system, and how is the pathway that you anticipate will be the most sustainable in the next period?
Well, for sure, there are a lot of uncertainties, of course, when it comes to the next 2 decades with respect to the phase-out of fossil methane, leaving aside biomethane, and, let's say, the growing penetration of green gases. On our side, what we are trying to do, first of all, let's say, in a way, whatever we are building today, when it comes in particular to high-pressure pipelines, is built according to the pure hydrogen specification. So let's say we have a system that, with respect to the investment, which are being deployed now and that are quite significant, is, let's say, technically ready to be converted without additional investment. The other element we are looking at, of course, is to, let's say, analyze in detail the evolution of the geographical supply-demand balance within the country. Because, of course, one thing is to say we see a certain demand of natural gas, we see a certain demand going forward for hydrogen, but we also need to look at where this is located, also take into account that the gas infrastructure are being used a lot also for export, and more will be used for export in the next decade. And in doing that, we have just completed a call for interest in which we have asked all the market players to give us their view with respect to when they think they will technologically be ready either to produce or to utilize hydrogen. And let's say we have started creating a roadmap with respect to when, let's say, in the next decade, some of these assets, of the existing assets, will be repurposed, and how we are going to manage some periods of overlapping, in which, of course, we are not going to phase out completely one fuel, and we are going to have the need to introduce the other. Also because many pipelines will maintain their need to remain operational to provide access to the CCGT, which will be maintained into the system. And so we are developing this dynamic long-term model, which we will update 1,000 times in the next 4, 5, 10 years. And the most important thing is we are making sure that whatever we build can, from the technological perspective, be ready to be utilized for different molecules. And this gives us a bit of natural hedging, because if there is a delay in the introduction of green molecules and there is a longer utilization of natural gas, we will shift the repurposing a bit later. And this, let's say, will allow us to, let's say, of course, cover the needs in a more gradual manner and try to optimize the cost. The more we can use for some years this infrastructure for natural gas, the better it will be, because they will be partially amortized. And when the utilization for hydrogen will come, the unitary cost will be partially absorbed by the phase of utilization for natural gas.
Definitely a very crucial issue for all the consumers, and how, let's say, this evolution and the expansion of infrastructure could be served in the most sustainable, I would say, and most cost-efficient way. Mr. Ladakakos, you personally, also a Lithuanian, let's say, association, has been highly involved all this period about the new framework for offshore wind farms, and how this could develop and, let's say, also become a new technology that, depending also on the specifics of its production in terms of time series and robustness in terms of production throughout the year, could allow, let's say, a more, let's say, dispatchable approach in the system. However, the development of these offshore wind farms still now remains quite challenging. We don't have yet a complete framework. We have the infrastructure issues and many other challenges ahead of us. What is your perception on this, and how feasible would be, let's say, in the medium term, I would say, to have in place such kind of assets?
First of all, offshore wind was a bet for our country for many, many years, but due to technical constraints, mainly, we could not exploit the good potential that we have in our waters. So the latest years, we have seen a rapid improvement in the technology of floating wind, and this gave the opportunity for our country to jump in the race and to be one of the players that can be very competitive in the future in the offshore wind sector. We are doing a lot of efforts. There is a very big commitment of the government in favor of offshore wind, and this is very positive. We are very happy to see this. There is each step it's steady. I mean, I see here Mr. Stefatos, here Emma is doing a good job going step by step and doing all the necessary actions. Our appetite is so big and our eager to see things is so big, so sometimes we are complaining that we should go faster, we should do more things, we should have the first auctions as soon as possible. However, we must all realize that it's a very challenging technology. And because we are speaking of floating wind, we have to recognize that we are still in a learning curve, technologically wise. We are still in a curve of decreasing the cost. The costs are still high, and nobody should forget this. And we are still in a curve of, let's say, adjusting our local supply chain in order to be able to serve the future projects. So even if today the government had made all the auctions and we were ready to have the first installations, we would not be, as a country, ready to deliver them. Okay, I'm saying this in order for everybody to realize that the narrative of offshore wind in Greece is very good, is absolutely important because, as you explained, the profile and the nature of this power station is an absolute must for our electrical system. However, there are many actions and steps that need to be done before we need the first realizations. Having said that, we have a national target of 1.9 gigawatt by 2030. It's a very ambitious target. We are all focused and committed to deliver it. Let's hope at least that by 2030 we will have these projects starting constructions, and this will be a very good signal for all the future projects that we expect to come in the country.
Thank you, Mr. Ladakakos. And maybe a final, very brief round of questions to all the three of you. Just to conclude with the cross-border projects. We have, let's say, witnessed a lot of publicity for a variety of cross-border projects, both for electricity and gas, of new kind of grid and pipeline projects, both serving our country either, let's say, as an exporter, but even as a transit, let's say, a region in order to pass through, let's say, some energy carrier from our country to other European countries. What is your perception on this, and where you see any challenges, any issues that we have to be careful, or what could be the right pathway and how to explore these cross-border projects? I would give the floor first to you, Mr. Ladakakos.
Okay. Energy transition and cross-border electrical grids come together. We cannot achieve the targets. We cannot have a really decarbonized electrical system if we do not have a lot of interconnected systems, plus the putting down the cost and having competitive prices for the consumers, for the industry, etc., is also something that all these interconnections are serving, and it's an absolute must. My opinion is that our country has to serve the narrative of being an exporter of green electricity and not necessarily being an importer or transit or whatever. But in order to be an exporter, and this is at least what I hear the government, even the Prime Minister saying, we have to design very, very carefully our renewables system. I have read very recently an analysis by Mr. Tsafos, who presents why Greece has a competitive advantage. The wind potential of the country, it has a competitive advantage because it's not correlated at all with the wind energy potential of the North Seas. And this shows, let's say, gives the vision of a system tomorrow where, as we say, when it blows in the north, it does not blow in the south, but there is sun in the south, and we can supplement this. And when there is no wind in the north, there is wind in the south, and we can supplement and support the European countries. So we are very positive to see all the projects that are in the pipeline. We see, let's say, we put the highest ranking to projects that interconnect our country with the consumption centers, which in our region are mainly consumption centers in the north, not necessarily Germany, but also the North Corridor, yes. And of course, from geostrategic perspective, but also from an energy perspective, the projects with Egypt, with Cyprus, etc., are very important to be realized.
Thank you. Mrs. Galli, for the same question.
Well, first of all, let me say that I agree that for having a resilient and decarbonized energy system, we need a strong network of interconnection. I just would like to say that not only electrical interconnection, but that we need to be agnostic when it comes to the technology to transport energy, because depending on what the energy is needed for, it can be much more efficient in some cases to transport it as electrons or as molecules. And therefore, in this respect, we need really to consider and exploit all the technologies for energy transportation. Having said that, let's say when it comes to gas pipelines, there is a lot going on. As the Ambassador Payet mentioned before, the vertical corridor has made some significant steps in terms of materialization, in the sense that, let's say, we have the connection with ICGB, we enter into the system of Alexandroupolis. The compressor station that we are building and will increase the export capacity will be operational by the second part of the next year. And this will, in cooperation with the TSO of the countries along the vertical corridor, are already enabling the delivery of natural gas imported through the Greek LNG terminals up to Ukraine. Of course, what we see is the potential for the future to not only strengthen this capacity, for instance, we are building in connection with North Macedonia, but also use this kind of infrastructure like the domestic grid for export of green molecule. There is, let's say, with a targeted and well-planned selection of renewable in Greece, there is the potential to produce at competitive cost hydrogen to be exported. Let's say just a few days ago, Europe announced that the Southern Hydrogen Corridor is considered a flagship project. Of course, this is a much more advanced project, the one from Algeria, Tunisia, Italy, up to Germany. But cost-wise, we have absolutely nothing worse than that. And so we should really, it's a matter of maturity, it's a matter of promoting these potential developments, because producing molecular with energy, with renewable energy in Greece is less risky than producing it in Algeria and Tunisia for European consumer. So we really need to look at with an integrated approach within gas and electrons on the best way to export energy.
Definitely integration and maturity, and have a whole diversification, the complementary of the different markets and different sectors. And because we are completely out of time, Mr. Lagios, just a punchline about the next era. Where do you think?
I mean, in terms of the interconnections, I think our country during the first semester of 2024 was vastly an exporter of energy. This is very important. With the right political will, the cross-border diplomatic relations, and proper management of geopolitical risks, I think we can rightfully and cleverly design an efficient system, both in terms of generation capacity, also in terms of transmission and distribution network, to remain closer to where demand is required, and have countries such as ours producing, storing, and exporting energy which exceeds their national demand requirements. And I have to say also that as an extension to the discussion about curtailments, I think we're anticipating an increase, perhaps, of electricity demand by way of realizing electrification in transport, electrification of industry, and all this coming together. And with the cross-border transmission lines, I think we would be in a
more
place
sustainable system.
Yes, to absorb more renewable capacity.
Definitely. Very interesting talk. I think we have a lot to say. There is an intervention and keynote speech right afterwards. I think it will cover the whole topic and the whole issue in the energy domain. Thank you very much for your participation and hope it was a productive dialogue for all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you.